Welcome again, and especially to those of you who are not coming again but coming for the first time. It's really good to see you. So, I'm used to following Gitter up after Gitter in this room. It's been several times, but I'm still getting used to this. I'm the Experience Officer. It's only the second time I'm doing the talk with that title, but I am really starting to enjoy it. I've complained the last several years that really the roadmap doesn't change. But there, as Gitter mentioned, there's a bit of a sea change. So I'm not changing my form of evangelism. This is still about Dialog APL, because cloud computing is really about to break loose. I mean, how many people are already deploying stuff on the cloud in one form or planning to do it really soon? Yeah. So this is something, if you haven't looked at it, you need to start reading about it and looking at what we're doing to support it. The good news is that the roadmap really still hasn't changed, because most of the things that we're doing, this is a slide from Dialog 14. I think the word cloud appears in our keynote presentations for the first time, probably 3 or 4 years before that. So the work that we're doing in particular on going cross-platform and parallel processing, launching remote processes and managing them from APL, stuff that we've been working on for years, is all really just ready to roll out on the cloud. For example, one of the things you could really take advantage of on the cloud is going parallel. The isolates, how many people are using isolates? That's very disappointing. That's really disappointing. I thought this was the bee's knees, and everybody would be using it. It's been there for 5 years now. Maybe the cloud is going to make it much more interesting, because this is another slide from the regular isolate presentation, and it shows how you can start isolates, and if you have another computer, you can harness that, and of course the other computer could just be a virtual machine in the cloud, or 100 virtual machines in the cloud that you spin up just for 5 minutes to do some computation before moving on. Of course, parallel is good. It requires some work, though, and most of you are probably just hoping that we'll make everything go incredibly fast. And there also, for many years now, we've been working very steadily towards improving the performance release by release. That was really the really good one. But they're all pretty good. And I don't know whether the 3/5 there is accurate in terms of how many more ideas Marshall and Roger and other people have to go into version 17. But it also looks like it's going to be very good. And one of the really important things about the cloud is that your ultimate cost is in many ways just going to be measured in watts, because you're paying for a data center up in the forests of Finland where it's been placed to be cheap to cool, or on Iceland where they can use geothermal power to drive it. But you're really paying for the CPU and the memory consumption. And memory is actually one of the areas where APL also does really well. If you design your applications well in APL using bit booleans or 1-byte integers, you can really have a dramatically smaller memory footprint for big data analysis than you would have if you were using typical object-oriented technologies, although they're realizing this stuff and catching up. But we have a huge head start there. So the text up in the top corner is a little bit provocative, and the Microsoft fans will probably be shaking their heads. But if you look at, and I'm not in any way suggesting that Microsoft isn't going to be a major player in the cloud, but what you'll see if you look at what Microsoft is doing on the cloud is that they're producing very cut down, trimmed versions of their operating systems, which from an application building perspective look more and more like Unix's. So the work that we're doing to support Unix is going to be beneficial also for the people who stay with Microsoft for the long term. Linux, though, is currently sort of a bit ahead because it typically uses less memory and therefore is cheaper, and of course the licenses are cheaper. And we're really working hard. We have this mantra that you should be able to develop an APL application on any one of our platforms and without converting the code. Did I talk for too long? Jason? Okay. I have to talk less on each slide. Yeah. But Richard, for example, has been doing very hard work on cross-platform file functions, so you can deal with files and folders and so on in exactly the same way on all platforms. He has a talk this year as well on extensions to that. One of the big challenges, of course, going cross-platform is you need to be able to develop and debug code on all the different platforms. And this isn't the earliest slide. The earliest version of RIDE, I think, is 2 or 3 years before that, when we had a Silverlight version. But RIDE has really come a long way, and now, thanks to the efforts of Gil and Callum, is really reaching. If you look at this screenshot here of version 4, we can argue about the coloring of the icons and stuff like that. But the functionality of the Windows IDE, the most important functionality, including things like the threads window and the stack window and the workspace explorer, all the things that I think people find really important when debugging applications, are becoming available on all platforms. So you can have your virtual machine on the cloud, and you can connect RIDE to it and do development there. Now, of course, as the weather changes, we're going to need some young people on deck to help us weather the storms and work hard. And managers, of course. We need to make APL attractive to new generations, not just of developers, but also their bosses. And that's something that I don't feel I spoke for too long there on that slide. Okay, so what do these people need? Well, let's look at the managers first. The biggest problem, I think, is to be able to recruit and train APLers, to feel confident that if your project suddenly grows, we have the cloud now, so you can quickly ramp up your hardware, or you don't have to ramp up your hardware, you have virtual hardware, but ramping up your development team is still something where I think managers don't feel completely confident. And that's where the evangelism work, getting out there, functional and other dynamic language conferences, spreading the word of APL, getting a new generation of developers to consider APL an interesting language to learn so that they'll be available is very important. Managers really feel it's important to be able to use industry standard tools, methodologies. They're all getting into agile now. They want to do continuous deployment. They want to use Git. They want test-driven development and so on. And these are things that we really need to work hard on in the next years to make them feel comfortable. We're making good progress, but there's a way to go. And I'm going to do a presentation after lunch on this. This is perhaps one of the key aspects at the moment, or the first one that Dyalog really needs to provide industrial strength solutions for, is APL source code in text files. We're nearly there, but there's still work to do. Because that allows people to use third-party tools. This is something called SourceTree that we use. I think nearly everybody in the APL tools group is using SourceTree. It's connected to GitHub, so it's providing a graph of all the branches and tracking all the commits that have been made by Marinus, Jay, and myself. And because the APL code is in text files, it's able to diff the code in exactly and provide information about differences and so on, incremental updates to the code database in exactly the same way that it would do for JavaScript or C# and so on. And that's really critical. So if you're not already heading in this direction, you might want to consider it. What do the newbies need? Well, it turns out they sort of need pretty much, they certainly start in the same place as these managers. Of course, they need to be recruited rather than be doing the recruiting. But they already know how to use these methodologies. They've just been trained in them, and they expect an APL shop to be doing state-of-the-art software development, of course, using the methodologies that they're accustomed to. Now, all of us, whether we're new or old, need a modern set of libraries to build our applications on. And the demands of the new platforms, we need to encrypt our data, everything needs to be secure, we need to use internet protocols like JSON and XML to transfer the data. The demands of these new platforms mean that creating new libraries and sharing them is more important than it's ever been before. And the libraries need to be easy to find. You need to be able to share. Ideally, many of you will contribute to them. And we believe GitHub is a good place to start. Now, I know, apparently, some people are intimidated by GitHub. How many people feel intimidated by GitHub? Okay. So don't panic. All the libraries, all the source code that we put into GitHub that we feel is important for your applications, we will also include with Dyalog installations. So you can use GitHub if you like it. Apparently there are a whole bunch of people who do like it. If you want to see all the changes, like you saw on that list there, you know, who committed what last week, what's Dyalog actually working on, you can go to GitHub and you can see charts and things, how many commits we're making. And if you want to contribute, though, of course, if you really want to zip it up and send it in an email to somebody at Dyalog and let us put it in the repository, that'll be okay. So what is GitHub? It's a web-based source code management. So there's a tool called Git, which is perhaps the most widely used source code management system today. GitHub is a web-hosted version of that. You can have private stuff there. You can optionally make it public, accept contributions. So if that sounds really scary still, close your eyes for the next minute or so. But if you really want to help us reach the new generation of users, managers, and developers, you might want to keep them open. So I've browsed to Dyalog library Conga on GitHub, which is where the APL code that surrounds the Conga DLLs. These are utilities to use them. So you can see there's 3 files here. There's FTP client, HTTP command, and HTTP utils, which is some APL code that helps you use our TCP library, essentially. If you're not comfortable going there to get it, these are things that we consider really important. So in the main version 16 folder, below the Dyalog folder, there's something called library, and below library there's something called core and something called Conga. And those 3 files are there. If you want to load them in and use them in your APL application or interactively, the SALT working directories are set up so that everything in library will just be loaded, same as WSPath for the workspaces. And you can load it and you can check whether the Great Large Hadron Collider has destroyed the world by doing an HTTP command get on this URL, which returns some XML data, which you pass through quad XML, which gives you a matrix where the second column is the tags and the third column is the data content. You can pass that to a little dfun where you extract the content tag, and the value is nope, which is very good to know. This, you can't read this, it's just the 25 repositories that Dyalog, the 25 public repositories that Dyalog currently has on GitHub. Have a browse, okay? If anybody's sitting next to you with their eyes closed, you please poke them so they come back. All right, and of course, we need to make it easier to learn APL. Try APL is now, how many years is that, Brian? 5.5. So again, this was one of the young, it was a programming contest winner, Joel Huff, who in his presentation, I can't remember where it was, Boston, Boston, he said, well, the first thing I do when I want to learn a language is I go http://try nameoflanguage.org. And there wasn't one. And I was sitting in the front row and I pigeoned Brian and I said, we got to have one of these. And he's done a great job. This is now really attracting, I think we have something like 30 or 40 users a day using this. I think John gave a whole evening lecture workshop where all of the participants were just using TryAPL as an interactive. He didn't have to install anything. They were just typing away on TryAPL. Adam has found this thing, Try It Online, through his code golfing friends, I presume. This is something that it supports 343 languages. If you type APL into the search box, you can see that we're not the only game in town. Nikolov is out there. He's got it. Oh, I don't know whether Adam did that or Nick did it, but I presume Nick did. And this is different from TryAPL. TryAPL is very sandboxed. It wants to make sure you can't destroy, you can't type _h, rm, star, or -r. The Try It Online allows you to run anything at all, and it runs it in a virtual machine sandbox, which as soon as it's finished running it, it just destroys it and builds a new one. So you can, put classes in, and you can do anything you want. We're working on the cookbook, I think. Again, unfortunately, that's something you've heard about for 2 or 3 years without it being completed. But it's now moving ahead quite well, and I think early next year we're going to be able to publish the first complete APL cookbook. So that's a book written by Stephen Taylor and Kai Jäger with a bit of input from us. And it takes you from the point where you become comfortable with APL as a mathematical notation, and maybe you've written some cool algorithms, and you need to ship them as a product. So you need logging and configuration files, and you need to create standalone executables, you need online help and all of that stuff. So it's the cookbook for turning your various ingredients into something edible. Gita mentioned the webinars. That's something I'm really happy that we set ourselves the target of doing one a month. For 4 months in a row, we've been able to do that. Here's a picture from the last one. It's in our boardroom. Jason's started playing with this green screen technology so that we float in front of our APL sessions. We can walk around in our APL sessions if we want. This is our 2 summer interns, Becca and Stephanie, who did a robot show. All of this stuff is recorded. If you missed it, go to Dialog.tv and you can see it all again. If you haven't been introduced, which year are we on now, Gita, of ships? We had worms.
Yeah, 7 worms.
7 worms. This is the 13th.
Yeah, but we had a worm before.
We had a worm before, okay. So we're on to ships now for the regular user meetings. The webinars have Odin's ravens, Hugin and Munin, as the symbols, because the legend or the story is Odin sent them out into the world each morning. They flew around the world, and then they returned at the end of the day, and they sat on his shoulder, and they told him what was happening in the world. So that's why we felt they were appropriate for the webinars. There isn't one this coming Thursday, but this is just to show you that generally we run them mid-afternoon in the UK. And in the ones we've run so far, we've had people actually east of Bangalore. I think we had people in Japan, and we've had people in San Francisco. I think we had somebody in Hawaii, but they must have been up at stupid o'clock. But most people should be able to follow them without having to be up in the middle of the night. So far we've done 4 webinars. I'm not going to read that aloud. You can watch them live. Their recordings are generally available immediately. I think you can arrive half an hour late and start watching it. Yeah. So we haven't decided what to do. I think this date will work. I haven't actually asked anybody else at Dyalog whether that's going to be okay. But you have a few days now to suggest webinar topics. It would be very useful to us to know what you would like us to spend an hour demonstrating to you. Now, although this is the 13th time I do this, I do have one demo. I'm going to dare to do one demo. The latest weapon for teaching APL that's just been added to our arsenal, I think not even everybody at Dyalog has seen this yet, it just arrived, is something called Jupyter Notebooks. The Jupyter Notebooks are a technology that allow you to mix what's called Markdown, so you can format text with titles and links and fonts and colors and so on, with expressions that are executed in a programming language. So here's a little introduction to Sharpplot that I started putting together. It doesn't yet teach you very much about Sharpplot. But you can see that we have a section of Markdown where I can write text, format it nicely. I haven't really worked very hard on that. I think if I double-click on this, it turns into edit mode, and I can edit the Markdown. But if I was a user, I would come to this, I would just click on play, and it moves down. Uh-oh. All right, just a second. Decided to shut down on the way from my room to here. So it's based on Python, the py in Jupyter. There we go, Jupyter Notebook. With a bit of luck, that'll come back to life. Oh, yeah, see, it launched an APL in the background. It's still using a development system, so you can see it, but of course, well, actually, it may have to be a development system. So what this is also is another example of how valuable it's going to be that the RIDE protocol is open and JSON-based now, because we outsourced this work to a technology partner in Belgrade, a bunch of people we've been working with. They've also worked on the HTML renderer, and they were able to put this together in a few weeks without us saying more than, here's the RIDE protocol. Here's the specification for Jupyter Notebooks. Please give us a Jupyter Notebook kernel for Dyalog APL. Yep. So we step through the tutorial. I need to define a little IBeam. RIDE has, if you're using RIDE, there's a little IBeam called 3500 IBeam, which if you pass it some HTML, it pops up a window and renders that. So if you have graphics or anything, you can get that to pop up. And the Jupyter Notebook code intercepts that message. So when we get down to this line here, where we say run Adrian's samples.sample, render it as an SVG file in fixed aspect ratio, and then pass it to the IBeam, we'll probably make this a bit slicker for the Jupyter Notebook, so you don't have to do that. You can have graphical output. So if your application, if you write APL code that generates HTML or SVG or anything like that, we can have APL notebooks containing a mixture of APL code, text that gets output. And it's interactive. So when we get down here, I've just added some outer product. So if I go and edit that, I can say, APL supports Cartesian products. Maybe that's not technically exactly correct. And then resume running. It runs that expression. The user can say, well, that's very interesting, but actually I want to do it from 3 up to 10. Hit Shift Enter, and interactively re-execute pieces of this. So we think this is really promising as a way to publish APL tutorials in the future. I think it's what's used now generally by most people who are using Python or modern languages to show how their libraries work and so on. It's really exciting stuff. All right, so please join us when you get a copy of this, which will be very soon, and start creating notebooks. This will require that you have Dyalog APL installed and Python installed. I think we need to work fairly quickly with Jason and Brian on finding a way to use something like TryAPL Engine to host the session so that people don't have to install anything. We'll use the cloud for that. It should be easy. Okay, so what next? Well, obviously, the same old performance documentation, quality. I think this is perhaps the most important thing from my perspective for version 17 is really going to industrial strength on the support for APL source code. There's a talk by Adam, I think tomorrow, on a notation for array constants, because one of the things you're going to need, if everything becomes text-based, is a way to represent arrays, the constants in your program, multidimensional arrays, nested arrays, literally in the source code. We need tools to build workspaces and other runtime, I think they call them artifacts in the continuous deployment terminology, from the source. We have a bunch of new libraries to work on, HTML generation. It's time to move on from COM and be able to create Excel files, not just on Windows, also on other platforms. And for the time where Windows has really been the most important platform for APL applications, we've had really good integration with first DDE and then COM and then .NET. We don't have a good story yet on other platforms for integration. So we need a way to package your APL system as a shared library, and we need to support APL as a scripting language, hashbang style, if any of you are young enough to know what that means. Way of calling one scripting language, or Jeff, that includes Jeff. Yes, sorry. Yeah, I have to be careful with words here, terminology. When I really get into dreaming about what I'd like to see, I think, I'd like a startup switch, so you start Dyalog and out of the box without any additional source code, no salt, no my server, it just runs as a web service and starts serving up my little workspace containing foo and goo as a web service. I'd like to see the HTML renderer integrated with RIDE so that you can run an application on the cloud as a personal user, start an application, and without running Apache or IIS or any web server, just have a rich user interface rendered on your Android device. I think to take advantage of the cloud, we really need this cross-platform tools to launch remote processes very, very easily from APL, so you can just spin up processes on the cloud or on other machines that are available to you. And then we'll be able to have portable applications, desktops, mobile, cloud, regardless of whether the user interface is rich or simple, or there's no user interface at all. And you can build both personal or corporate applications and have APL running everywhere, on things as well. Version 16 was a really good step in this direction. Some of the technologies are still a bit fresh, but I'm totally convinced that they are all steps in the right direction for supporting the cloud and attracting that next generation of developers and managers. And the evangelism is ramping up. It's not just the kids, and it's not just in Bangalore, it's now also in Dublin. John has been talking to functional programmers in Dublin at a meetup regularly, and they're quite enthusiastic, I believe. Yeah? They love it. And the Indian functional programmers love it. So we've been to Functional Conf, I think 3 years. We're going again this year. I'm going. Aaron's been invited separately. Roger is coming along as well this year. Here's Roger doing a talk in Bangalore recently, talking about selfies. And Aaron is going to be repeating a bit of the talk that I saw him see in Boulder, Colorado at something called LambdaConf, which is another functional. We're at the moment, we're going to a lot of functional events because it's easy to sell APL to functional people. They get it. It's like they think APL is this modern thing that was just invented as a branch of functional programming. It seems familiar to them. And Aaron's talk, which I'm really looking forward to just before lunch, was his introduction, or I don't know exactly what Aaron's going to do, but it's, I'm assuming it's something similar to what you did there, where you really talked about the differences between the mindset of traditional programming and APL. Yeah. And Adam with the Code Golf, I think Marinus came to us through Code Golf, is that correct? This is really starting to have an impact, and instead of quotes from Functional Conf, I have some quotes from code golfers that who've been, watching Adam, and an increasing number of people submit things in APL, or even if they can't submit, I don't have an APL interpreter, but I still upvote them because they're awesome. And I really like this one. APL has a lot of specific built-ins, but they're also versatile. And I like to, go to dynamic language conferences and say, well, APL is general purpose, domain-specific notation. And now, Jay is going to tell us how it all is all going to come true, hopefully. Thank you.